Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Monsters Manifested, right here on DM Tools with MaxMcCool. On today's episode, we're going to be covering our final demon subtype with the Yochlol. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. The Yochlol's stat block can be found on page 65 of the Monster Manual, and its lore can be found on page 54. So, let's begin there. The Yochlols are the handmaidens of Lolth, extensions of the Spider Queen's will, dedicated to acting as her spies, taskmasters, and agents of villainy. They attend their goddess in the demon web pits, but Lolth sometimes dispatches Yochlols to the material plane to guard her temples and to aid her most devout priestesses. Yochlols don't form outside Lolth's realm of the demon web, and they serve no demon lords except their queen. Outside the abyss, a Yochlol can assume the guise of a female drow or a monstrous spider to conceal its demonic form. In its true form, the fiend appears as a pillar of yellow slime with a single malevolent eye. In its drow and true form, a Yochlol's touch carries the same venomous touch as its spider form's bite. And that's all there is when it comes to the Yochlol. It's actually pretty different from what I was expecting to read in terms of lore. I assumed that the Yochlol was probably more of a secretive subterfuge type of demon, which they are, by way of the lore saying that they're spies and taskmasters and stuff like that. But I thought that they would behave more sort of in the way of camouflage, hidden in nature or within certain spots, rather than as female drow or as spiders. But we could certainly pull from this stuff and make something interesting, I think. But before we get into all of that, let's move on to the stat block and see what we got. The Yochlol is a medium fiend, demon, shape changer with a chaotic evil alignment. It has an armor class of 15, which is natural armor, hit points that average 136 or 16d8 plus 64, and it has a movement speed of 30 feet as well as a climb speed of 30 feet. The Yochlol has a strength of 15, a dexterity of 14, a constitution of 18, an intelligence of 13, a wisdom of 15, and a charisma of 15. Its saving throws include dexterity plus 6, intelligence plus 5, wisdom plus 6, and charisma plus 6. It has the skills of deception plus 10 and insight plus 6. The Yochlol has damage resistances to cold, fire, lightning, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing from non-magical weapons, and it is immune to the damage type of poison, as well as immune to the poison condition. It has the senses of dark vision for 120 feet, and a passive perception of 12. The Yochlol can speak the languages of Abyssal, Elvish, and Undercommon, and has a challenge rating of 10. Onto the abilities. Shape Changer. The Yochlol can use its action to polymorph into a form that resembles a female drow or a giant spider, or back into its true form. Its statistics are the same in each form. Any equipment it is wearing or carrying is not transformed. It reverts to its true form if it dies. Magic Resistance. The Yochlol has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. Spider Climb. The Yochlol can climb difficult surfaces, including upside down on ceilings, without needing to make an ability check. Innate Spellcasting. The Yochlol's spellcasting ability is Charisma, with its spell save DC of 14. The Yochlol can innately cast the following spells requiring no material components: At Will, Detect Thoughts and Web, and once per day, Dominate Person. And finally, Web Walker. The Yochlol ignores movement restrictions caused by webbing. Onto the actions. Multi-attack. The Yochlol makes 2 melee attacks. Slam, or Bite in Spider form, is a melee weapon attack with a plus 6 to hit, a reach of 5 feet, or 10 feet in demon form on one target. On a hit, it does an average of 5 or 1d6 plus 2 bludgeoning or piercing in spider form damage plus an average of 21 or 6d6 poison damage. Finally, mist form. The Yochlol transforms into toxic mist or reverts to its true form. Any equipment it is wearing or carrying is also transformed. It reverts to its true form if it dies. While in mist form, the Yochlol is incapacitated and cannot speak. It has a flying speed of 30 feet, can hover, and can pass through any space that isn't airtight. It has advantage on strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throws, and it is immune to non-magical damage. While in mist form, the Yochlol can enter a creature's space and stop there. Each time that creature starts its turn with the Yochlol in its space, the creature must succeed on a DC 14 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned until the start of its next turn. While poisoned in this way, the target is incapacitated. And that's all there is when it comes to the stats of the Yochlol. We've got a pretty solid monster here with not much in the way of attacks. I mean, it just has the slam and the bite, or slam, which is bite in spider form. However, it seems to have a pretty good capability in terms of applying statuses or conditions onto your players. So I think that could make for some interesting combat there. And with its ability to sort of transform and shape change and cause different sorts of havoc and chaos and stuff, I think it could make for a pretty interesting monster that will intrigue our players. So without further ado, let's move on to some adventure crafting. Okay, so the first thing that came to mind for me when I was looking at the Yochlol was honestly absolutely nothing really related to what its lore description had spoken of in terms of its behavior and actions and how it behaves in the world. I saw the Yochlol and my knee-jerk response was that it looks like a sort of dripping, moldy, ochre-colored tree that would probably use its figure and shape to sort of hide amongst nature in the trees or in the woods or the forest type thing and sort of ambush the players in a way that they would think that they were well protected or covered or safe, relatively speaking, and then these Yochlols sort of on gnarled roots come in and encircle them and, lay siege to their position. But that's not at all what the Yochlol seems to do, apparently, which is fine. You could implement it that way if you wanted to, but using the description and abilities of the Yochlol, I think we can still generate a pretty solid adventure, especially because of its capability to shape change and what it can shape change into. So it can change shape into a form that is something akin to a female drow or a giant spider, or its true form, of course. So what I'm thinking is, and this may be playing off of my initial thoughts or reaction to looking at it and seeing it as a haunted tree monster, if you would. Imagine something like an evil ent or something like that. And you could create something like this mysterious woman in the woods where you have a Yochlol who is perhaps keeping vigil at an old, eroded, broken down temple or church or place of worship to Lolth in a very old forest or a cursed woods type environment. And part of the reason why the forest is cursed is because any of the people that enter the forest, or perhaps hunters that hunt game in the forest, know that within a certain radius, perhaps in the heart of the woods, or perhaps in some specific location, remote location in the woods, there are sightings of a drow woman who walks around and lays claim to the land. Perhaps they see this drow female that scares off the hunters, or perhaps they have all sorts of rumors of a sort of specter or spirit. You could even have claims of them seeing this drow walking through the woods between the trees, and when spotted or called out to, she suddenly dissipates into this cloud of mist and it flies off, and you could play it off as sort of old rumors or old maidens' tales and stuff like that people say at night to their kids to keep them from running off into the forest, or to keep them from going out too far or staying out after the sun goes down. And in fact, there is an individual there laying guard to the woods for some reason. Now, the most straightforward reason, as I had mentioned, was perhaps there's an ancient temple or chapel or something like that, a place of worship to Lolth, and this Yochlol has been charged with the responsibility of keeping guard to that area and just continuously patrols it and ensures that no one invades that space or tries to demolish the structure itself or tries to lay claim to that area, right? You could also implement something that is perhaps more of a pathway or a boundary point, right? Where perhaps in the woods there is a hole or a cave or a tunnel that provides a place of ingress or egress into the Underdark, and therefore Lolth has assigned a Yochlol or maybe multiple of them to that area in order to keep guard of that spot, like as a post, as a guard post for entry and exit into the Underdark. And so you have Yochlols there sort of just keeping an eye out, and due to the fact that they can shape change into both female drow or giant spiders, you could then present a pretty interesting adventure where perhaps you have your players traversing through the accursed woods, trying to make sense of what's going on, and the reason for them being there could be any multitude of reasons. You could have perhaps someone who's got lost in the woods and never came out. They ventured too far. Perhaps there's a hunter or something to that effect who never came back, and it's now the end of hunting season, so they don't know what's happened to them. You could have something to the tune of your players knowing that there is a place of entrance there to the Underdark. If you were setting up your campaign or adventures to have your players traverse into the Underdark and take on the Drow or Illithid or anything like that, and they know of this place, it might be marked on a map that some merchant had sold them, or perhaps they found in the treasure of another individual or another place that they investigated or raided, stuff like that, and it's led them to this point. You could have a big bad there, and they know that this leads into their domain or into their territory. But I think that could play out pretty well, because then you could have things like giant spiders that are oddly more difficult to contend with than the ones your players may be used to if they've already gone up against giant spiders, especially with the Yochlol being a challenge rating of 10, right? So this would be oddly tough for them if it was just a simple spider, right? And you could have even things like, if you were to use something to the effect of like a haunted forest or accursed woods, you could set up a nice tone to the adventure and the traversal of your players by them hearing rustling in the trees and seeing strange things shift around, within the bushes and behind stuff, and have them contend with things like giant spiders or other sorts of animals. You could even have them perhaps see carcasses of other forest creatures, wolves, or, you could do deer and stuff like that. But perhaps if you present them with the corpses of predatory animals, then it gives them that bit of concern where it's like, okay, so whatever it is that's been in here and mucking about is taking out the predators of this environment, so it's probably a pretty serious predator itself, right? And you can even implement things like the Yochlol's mist form to take over their space and have them roll these constitution saving throws, and they don't really understand why or what's going on. All they know is that as they walk into this cloud of mist, they have to roll these checks in order to make sure that they don't become incapacitated or poisoned. So I think that you could do a lot here with the Yochlol in the way of setting a challenging adventure without even initiating any hard rolling, crunchy combat, right? This is all sort of the preamble to the final combat scenario, right? In which, as I mentioned, you could implement something like an old crumbled temple in the middle of the woods, and they spot this drow lady there who's just standing there or sitting there, kneeling there, praying at some altar. They approach her and try to communicate, and suddenly the drow attacks them and, throws some daggers or something, and they get into battle mode. And as they go into fight, she just poofs into a mist form and disappears, and they try to figure out where they've gone and what to do. You could have something to the tune of your players entering a cave or a cavernous system, especially if you already have them in one currently, like perhaps an old abandoned mine in the side of a mountain, or perhaps a deserted dwarven kingdom or operation of some sort, a quarry even. And as they're going through this area, they're fighting off these insects, things like ankh eggs and perhaps even rust monsters and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, they come face to face with a giant spider, which is par for the course, given the environment they're in, but it starts doing strange things. Once they get it down to about half health or close to death, suddenly it dissipates into this mist form, and they watch it sort of fly off or dissipate further until it appears to be entirely gone, and they don't know what they're dealing with. So I think that there's a lot of avenues that you can take using the Yochlol in that way, as sort of this creature that presents itself as one thing, but is in fact something else. And you can maintain this shape or structure of the Yochlol up until the very end, where they cut down the giant spider or the drow, and suddenly they revert back into their demonic shape of this sort of stalk of yellowish waxy goo that sort of melts into the ground and appears to get absorbed by the earth relatively quickly or anything like that. And I think that that could make for a pretty cool experience that raises the eyebrows of your players at the table and leaves them kind of questioning what's going on and what they've been doing. Another way that you could implement a Yochlol, which I think could work decently, is as an invasive entity to an already established place, a settlement or village or anything like that. Even the underground tunnels or sewer system of a city, if you wanted to go that route, where they are traveling through this environment, and it seems to be infested by spiders and stuff, and you can throw in all sorts of webs and cobwebs, massive ones that your players would have to cut down with their weapons or burn up with their torches. And as they make their way through this sort of destitute, deserted, or dank and dark environment, they have an idea of what it is they're going to have to go up against. And once they approach, let's say, this final room or chamber or spot, they're expecting to see swarms of spiders or a giant spider or something like that. And you can throw a curveball at them where perhaps about halfway through the combat encounter, the giant spider changes its form and becomes this drow that looks like an assassin or something with daggers and stuff like that. And you could even make for some intrigue there, where you present them with perhaps a giant spider has a massive bandolier with daggers resting within it, sort of strapped around its abdomen. And your players are like, what is going on? We have a giant spider that has daggers that it can throw at us, and they're expecting one thing, and after the combat ensues, it changes shape into a drow, and they go, oh, okay, so this is some sort of assassin, magic user type roguish villain that we're going up against. And they continue combating it, and then suddenly, poof, it turns into mist and disappears for your players to either chase after or imagine they defeat it and continue on their way. And that's actually another way that you could implement an adventure using the Yochlol, right? Is imagine something like a prolonged or protracted chase scene where your players make their way to a certain area and they have to contend with perhaps a drow assassin who has been spotted in the town, and one of the guilds, perhaps the Thieves Guild or the Mercantile Guild, has made note of that, and so they've hired your players to journey forth and apprehend this drow before they can take out or damage, maim, kill whomever or steal whatever that they may be concerned they're going to do. And once the players confront the drow, you could have a combat ensue there, perhaps a quick one, couple of rounds, and suddenly they turn into mist and disappear, and your players have a hard time finding them because realistically what the Yochlol is trying to do is get away from them so it can continue its main objective. What that main objective is could be any number of things. So some examples of that would be something to the effect of perhaps there's a relic that the Thieves Guild had stolen from somewhere and the Yochlol is trying to get it back. Perhaps the Yochlol is actually on a mission of its own. It's been tasked by Lolth to go to a place and reclaim it for her. And so the Yochlol is actually in this female drow form, traversing through towns and cities and the like in order to get to that final destination and lay claim to it and begin defending it. And then you can have your players be on the tail of or be on the lookout for a female drow assassin that's been making their way to some unexplained area. And once your players arrive there, or perhaps try to get the jump on them, they have to contend with a giant spider, or they have to contend with the drow assassin with some other perhaps drow or monsters that may be native to the environment that the Yochlol is going to. And in that, you could again implement something scenic or thematic for your players as they're approaching the final position or final place of the Yochlol, in the way of things like corpses or carcasses and stuff like that, as the Yochlol sort of cuts down anything that's in its way as it makes its way to this final place in order to reclaim it for Lolth and for her worship or for her followers. And I think something like that would be pretty cool, because perhaps what the Yochlol is trying to do is get to this place, because this place is a significant spot for Lolth to send her followers to or out of from the Underdark. Imagine something to the effect of a passageway or a trapdoor or something like that, if you would, that has been locked out or closed off or defended against by the inhabitants of the material plane or of the surface of the material plane. And they've shut it down and closed it off many moons ago, centuries, millennia ago, in order to prevent the drow and Lolth's servants from coming out of there and wreaking havoc amongst the dwellers of the surface. And so now Lolth has charged these Yochlols, or a single one, to go back there to that place and open it back up so that they may have their opportunity to lay waste to the surface and lay claim to the land that she obviously believes that she so rightly deserves. All in all, though, I do think that the Yochlol is a pretty cool demon, very different from the others. It's pretty much the only one that isn't humanoid looking in a way. It's very out there, almost eldritch horror-y, rather than something that has bilateral symmetry, like 2 legs, 2 arms, or 4 legs, stuff like that. It's very out there, and I think that you could utilize it still in the way I had initially thought about it, as this sort of accursed tree in the forest, right? In the way that it's playing as a spy. I think you could put it in there in the back of the woods as your players are rolling through, and ask one of them, whoever's leading the march, to roll a perception check, and if they roll high enough, they spot a strange tree out in the distance, and then when they blink, it's gone, but they could have sworn they saw it, type thing, and it stands out because it's this massive, pulsing, dripping mass of yellow amongst a sea of brown bark and green, right? But I think that the Yochlol would make for a really good monster, especially if you were going the route of changing things up a little bit and going from the standard form sword and board to something a bit more thematic or a bit more atmospheric. Like, I would use the Yochlol in a way where perhaps my players had gone through a couple of adventures. We ran a couple of sessions that were a bit more vanilla combat, sort of sword and board and some magic, and the monsters that they've gone up against haven't been anything too out there or crazy. And I would place a Yochlol or an adventure using a Yochlol in there just to shake things up a bit and kind of, like I mentioned before, raise their eyebrows and make them curious about what's going on here. And then you can deliver a whole bunch of threads for your players to tug on. What's the purpose of the Yochlol? Why are they there? What are they doing there? What's the reason for them? It's such an odd monster, such a strange creature. It changes shape. It goes from this female drow to a giant spider to a cloud of mist, and then suddenly there's these strange yellow trees all over the place that appear to be following us. I think you can make for a pretty cool thematic adventure that also can affect the condition of your players, not just straight up in combat, like in the heat of combat or the heat of battle, but also as they're making their way to their final destination. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you fine folks when it comes to the Yochlol and how to implement it in an adventure. This is a very cool monster. I really would like to try and use it for one of my D&D sessions. I think it could make for a pretty interesting adventure. I'm be curious to see how my players would react. And I think that it's a nice end cap to the demonic type of monsters that we've covered so far. Which brings me to the next episode of Monsters Manifested, in which we will be beginning our journey through the monster types of devils. So, much like I did with the demon monster types, I think the following episode will be a high-level, sort of free-flowing, loose way of coming up with ideas and adventures and campaigns using devils and what their intentions are, how they behave, what they like to do, don't like to do, what they like to gain or what they hate to have, stuff like that, and sort of do a broad stroke session with the archdevils or top devils in their ranking system, in their hierarchy, if you would, and then go through successively throughout the episodes with the specific types of devils, and then how we can implement those ones in particular to a certain type of adventure or scenario for our players at the table. But until then, thank you all very much for tuning in. Once again, I highly appreciate it. Please remember to follow the podcast, download the podcast wherever you can, share the podcast, leave a rating wherever you can, as it would help the podcast out very much. I highly appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And if you're listening to this episode of Monsters Manifested on YouTube, I'd kindly ask that you like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell thing. I heard it does stuff, all those magic clicks, as they would help the channel out quite a bit and help the podcast quite a bit, help everything grow, help get this to the ears of more people who may be interested in running a game of D&D or perhaps need some help with inspiration or sort of a launch pad to get those creativity muscles working again and figure out what they can do for the people at their table that they'll enjoy playing through. So until next time, thank you all once again very much, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good day, everyone.